Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for tuning in with us again. Really appreciate your time in advance, and it's lovely to hear all the nice messages you've been sending over the last couple of weeks. Today, we have the pleasure of having a conversation with Pauline Cox. Now, Pauline is a nutritionist, a functional nutritionist, an entrepreneur, an author, loads of different things she's up to, and we're delighted to have her on the show today. Welcome, Pauline.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's super fun already, our conversation just before we hit record. Always got to remember to hit record. Otherwise, we just sort of end up doing the podcast before we even started it, right? I think a good place to start is, you're so versed in a lot to do with sort of female hormones and how we can incorporate that. We've been very male hormone heavy recently on the podcast. So I think it's a good place to sort of frame the conversation. What misconception do most people have around female hormones in general? And then maybe a sort of adjacent question of around perimenopause.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I think there is a lot of misconception out there that we have to try and control our hormones in some way, even from our teenage years when, at 13, 14, girls start getting their periods and they're heavy, and the only solution for them is to go onto the oral contraceptive pill, where they're having to control and try and externally regulate their hormone health. And that really is interspersed through our whole female lives in medicine. We're not really taught at any stage of our female lives that so much of what we do diet and lifestyle wise has a huge influence over our menstrual cycle. And also what we do in our 20s and 30s directly impacts that perimenopausal journey that we begin to experience from our late 30s through our 40s and into our 50s. So I think the biggest misconception that I would like to clear up is that there is so much that women can do from a dietary and lifestyle perspective to influence their own hormonal health, which very much shows up in their menstrual cycle.
Okay, so the levers one can pull are in the nutrition and diet, but also the importance of pulling them early enough, right? Not sort of being proactive about it, if I hear you correctly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that really comes down to helping young girls understand what periods are, like period literacy from a young age, not just that they're coming and this is what they mean, but what does normal look like, and what might something that is not as acceptable look like. So when young girls, for example, first start their periods, the balance between progesterone and estrogen can be a little bit off. So estrogen is this really important hormone that makes its appearance at the beginning of puberty, and it's responsible for laying down fat to create the female curves. It creates, we lay down fat around the hips, the butt area, the breast tissue. So we start to see estrogen exerting its forces at puberty. And it can take a little bit of time for progesterone to kick in and help to balance out the relationship between estrogen. So estrogen, and I've used this analogy quite a few times in the past, but I liken estrogen to grass growing thick and long. It's responsible for thickening the endometrial lining, so the lining that we shed to have our menstrual bleed. So progesterone is like the lawnmower that helps to keep the grass in check. So when progesterone isn't always there at the beginning of puberty, we get more of this heaviness, this clotty periods, more symptoms related to PMS. And then as the synergy, the relationship between estrogen and progesterone kicks in, progesterone can have that calming effect on estrogen. The grass is being kept in nice condition as the lawnmower is present. Now, there are many things that influence that relationship that can impact the presence of progesterone, i.e. the depletion of progesterone, and also impact the presence of estrogen, i.e. how well we're metabolizing estrogen, breaking it down in the liver as it passes through the GI tract and through the microbiome and out through our feces in the bowel and through urine. So the overdominance of estrogen and the underpresence of progesterone can show its impact at any point during a female life.
Typically over the course of a month, how much do these things fluctuate?
Well, men have a 24-hour cycle with their testosterone. So their sex hormones are nice and predictable in that 24 hours. For females, we have a 28 typically. Now, obviously, this can vary by a couple of days either side, but typically this 28-day cycle. And it's a fairly predictable cycle, obviously, aside from having any oral contraceptive pill or HRT. Without any exogenous hormones, it's a fairly typical cycle. However, things like stress can impact our hormones. For example, progesterone has the same building block as cortisol. So pregnenolone is this building block that they compete for. So if we have lots of cortisol being produced during that month, then progesterone can be lacking. And this is why when young girls or women or perimenopausal women experience a lot of stress, particularly through long periods of time, they can see the impact of that on their menstrual cycle. So this can deplete progesterone. Nutritional deficiencies can also have an impact on our progesterone. Nutritional deficiencies, but how we're eating has a huge impact also on our estrogen levels. So there are lots of things that impact our hormones. I mean, there's this entire, let's say, mind map of variables that impact our hormonal health, from nutritional deficiencies, inflammation from what we're eating. It can be how well our liver is detoxifying the hormones within our body. It could even be genetics. So you can have the little SNPs that are impacting your own physiology, your own ability to shunt estrogen down particular pathways. Even the gut microbiome. So the microbiome has a collection of microbes within it called the estrobolome. Now, these particular microbes produce an enzyme, beta-glucuronidase, and that particular enzyme helps to modulate how much estrogen is reabsorbed into the body or is destined to go down the pan. So that there are all these different areas. And the really great thing about that is that we can control that. We can understand how many estrogen or xenobiotics, how many hormone disruptors we're exposing ourselves to through plastic drinking bottles or body care products. We can decide how effective our liver function is and how well balanced our gut microbiome is, how stressed we are, how well we're sleeping, how nutrient dense our diet is. So there are all of these variables that we can have an influence over before we start looking at, do I need the pill, or do I need medication? Do I need to address my pain and my cramping through a pain reliever? Or am I low in magnesium? Am I low in anti-inflammatory omegas? So there's so much that women can do through diet, through food first, through supplement second, before going on to pharmacological solutions.
Yeah, it's such a big parallel with the men's side of the coin as well. Of if there's a hormonal problem, the solution is testosterone replacement therapy or something exogenous, and that might well be the case sometimes. But there's this whole gulf of things you can do in the middle that are nothing to do with any sort of pharmacological intervention. In the female side of the equation, you have, if there's some symptom-esque issue with hormones,
yes,
this bridge between doing nothing and, I guess, whether it's HRT or you mentioned the pill or other things that can interrupt your natural rhythm of these hormones. Do you think that this gulf in between gets enough airtime? Do you think it's a common knowledge?
Most definitely not. And one classic example would be endometriosis. So it's a condition that affects 1 in 10 women. There's very little funding when we think about how it impacts 1 in 10 women, which is on par with how many people have type 2 diabetes. And yet there's 20 times more funding allocated to type 2 diabetes than there is endometriosis. And this is likely because it's not considered a life-threatening disease. And yet it's a life-altering condition. Women suffer hugely when they have endometriosis. My own mother had a full hysterectomy at 39 years old because of decades of suffering from endometriosis. So when we look at a condition like endometriosis and we look at the massive knowledge gap between medical professionals and research, it's just not acceptable. And yet we really do have a great deal of knowledge around endometriosis in terms of the understanding that it's worsened by estrogen dominance. there's a huge link between gut health, leaky gut, as a sort of an instigator of endometriosis. And when we start to bring in different professions, when we start to integrate our knowledge with gynecology, endocrinology, integrative medicine, naturopaths, herbalists, when we start to bring in our knowledge and say, okay, here's this condition, here's what we know in endocrinology, here's what we know in gynecology, let's bring it all together and start to see how we can create a protocol for diet and lifestyle that we know can have a significant impact on the condition, and then look at the sort of pharmaceutical or even the really extreme of surgical interventions at a later date. Even getting a diagnosis on average takes 8 to 10 years with endometriosis.
Really? Wow. I had no idea how prevalent it was. There seems to be this whole theme of lots of different conditions rather than just going straight towards the traditional approach. Well-intentioned people that might not be in the weeds with the literature and things, but will strap a plaster on it. What is the conventional solution that gets touted for endometriosis? Endometriosis?
Endometriosis,
Right?
yes. So
Endometriosis, yeah.
it's an inflammatory condition where tissues similar to that grown typically within the uterus, the endometrial lining, are found outside of the uterus, around the fallopian tubes, the ovaries, the bowel. And it's a really painful condition that can cause bleeding, heavy bleeding, cramping. It can cause infertility as well. So it is a really major problem for women who experience it. And typically, because it's a condition that's worsened with estrogen dominance. It's not caused by estrogen dominance, but it is worsened by estrogen dominance. One of the conventional treatments is to have progesterone, a coil, a Mirena coil is a progesterone coil that can help to balance out estrogen. The typical treatment is trying to manage the symptoms as opposed to looking at, okay, why has this happened in the first place? Let's address the gut. Let's see if we can heal the gut, i.e. restore the integrity of the gut lining, where there's a potential that the microbes or food particles, or it is typically microbes, have migrated outside of the gut into the peritoneum or the gut, the sort of the pelvis area. And then they can be the instigators of this inflammatory condition where you start to get these lesions of tissue that are formed. But then it's the estrogen that's driving it. The estrogen's fueling that inflammatory condition. So when we take a step way back and examine the microbiome of women who are suffering from endometriosis versus those who aren't, we see this typical dysbiosis, this mismatched gut microbiome. So healing the gut, first and foremost, restoring the integrity of the gut lining, creating a nice balance in the microbiome, helping to balance out the estrobolome. If you remember earlier, I mentioned you've got this collection of microbes that produce an enzyme that when the estrogen goes via the liver and then via the gut, this enzyme can untag that estrogen that's ready to be disposed of and allow it to be reabsorbed into the body. So making sure that the estrobolome is appropriate and not allowing too much estrogen to go back into the body. It's important that the liver is functioning in tip-top condition. So if we're drinking lots of alcohol, eating a lot of processed food, high sugar foods, we're getting lots of fatty deposits in the liver, or we don't have the nutrients needed for those different phases of detoxification in the liver, then this is going to worsen estrogen dominance. So there are these key areas when it comes to just endometriosis alone, of looking at how's my liver functioning, what's going on in my gut, what's going on with my microbiome, what's going on with the integrity of my gut lining, how are my bowel movements, am I constipated so that metabolized estrogen is sat in my bowels too long and it allows it to get reabsorbed, what's going on with my genetics, am I struggling to detoxify estrogen because of a genetic mutation within my own physiology. There are all of these areas that we can look at to support a woman on her journey of balancing her hormones and noting the shift in the the symptoms that she's experiencing with endometriosis, bringing progesterone back up. So how's her stress levels? How's her sleep? Does she need more vitamin C and zinc and selenium to help build up progesterone to balance out estrogen? There's a lot that a woman can experience before that point that my mum reached, which was a full hysterectomy.
Okay. I mean, it's a very hopeful message as well, because you can do things in your power, right? Which is a wonderful thing to hear. And hopefully, a lot of people listening to this can, there's some actual takeaways for that. Me understanding more about the problem, speaking to you, it seems like it's way too simplistic just to sort of strap a band-aid on it, right? It seems like it's a complex thing. There's so many moving parts. So to look at the problem through one lens, maybe like traditional well-intentioned doctors have, it seems to be simplistic. And it sounds like your approach is consistent with the literature, which is actually, you mentioned gynecology, you mentioned the gut microbiome, you mentioned how different hormones can play a part. So with that in mind, what would be the actual takeaways for someone listening to this to take into their own hands where they can try those things in the middle?
Yeah, I would say never underestimate the power that you have. In my opinion, the most important decision you make on a daily basis, which is what you eat. And that's something that's within all of our power. That decision is such a critically important decision for every aspect of our health, mental health, longevity, what's going on in our brain for 10, 20, 30 years down the line, our cardiovascular health, but particularly your hormone health. Even eating cruciferous vegetables, for example, we know that cruciferous vegetables have these incredible compounds, sulforaphane being one of them, which really helps to optimize estrogen detoxification. So we might dismiss food as just being fuel for the body, but actually food is really powerful when it comes to the impact it has positively, but on the converse negatively as well. If you're eating a lot of processed or highly sugary foods that are causing your blood sugars to spike regularly, that's driving insulin resistance, that's impacting your inflammatory levels within your body, don't underestimate the importance of the daily habits that you're undertaking for their influence and impact on your body. Our bodies are innately intelligent, and when we give them the tools that they need, they reward us in ways that are really surprising to most people.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely agree with that. I'm really interested in the whole metabolic psychiatry field that's emerging. Super fascinating, and hopefully get some people on. But if you said 10 years ago that you can put psychiatric illnesses into what seems to be some form of what's the word I'm looking for? Remission.
Yes.
Someone would have looked at you and thought you're an absolute quack, right? And actually,
Absolutely.
it's here, which is amazing.
And it makes so much sense, because when we look at just the basic pathophysiology and start to recognize that mood disorders are highly linked to neuroinflammation. And one of the things that happens with neuroinflammation, so this is just when your brain's sat in a soup of inflammation, and it doesn't have to be really high levels. It's just this low level systemic inflammation that comes from poor gut health or poor dietary habits or not enough omega-3 fatty acids and too much omega-6 fatty acids. So when we've got this systemic inflammation going on, this influences our body's ability to produce serotonin and dopamine and GABA, these very important neurotransmitters. So when these neurotransmitters start becoming low, serotonin, for example, is your singing in the shower hormone. It really helps you feel vibrant and joyous. And so when that becomes low, we start to feel flat. When we don't have that joie de vivre. Dopamine is a very important motivation neurotransmitter. So when we're lacking in dopamine, we start to undergo dopamine-seeking behaviors to give our body that hit of dopamine it's looking for. And the easiest way to get a hit of dopamine is through food. You are guaranteed to get a really big hit of dopamine from a donut dripping in icing or a caramel frappe latte mocha choca drink in the morning. These are designed to send your dopamine levels through the roof. And that's why they're such addictive behaviors. When you've already got that systemic inflammation, your body's struggling to produce these neurotransmitters, you're getting them from these external sources, and then you become really reliant on these habits and don't really understand why. Why can't I give up that habit? I know it's not good for me, but I just can't seem to get myself through the day without a bag of Maltesers and a really sweetened beverage or whatever that might be. Understanding that your brain chemistry is being lit up like a Christmas tree through these foods and drinks that are designed and manipulated to tap into that system. When we bring our inflammatory levels down and we start to work with all of these pathways, and you mentioned it earlier, everything is connected. We tend to oversimplify things, but everything is connected. The gut to the brain, the liver to our inflammatory levels, to our blood sugar, our adrenals, to our sleep. But when we really break it down and we look at the simple acts of morning daylight for great sleep, of keeping our blood sugars balanced for inflammation levels, and really optimizing our gut microbiome through what we're eating, through following an anti-inflammatory diet and maybe even bringing in a few supplements to support that anti-inflammatory pathway, this in itself can begin to open up the brain's ability to start to produce its better levels of serotonin and dopamine and GABA, which is a really calming neurotransmitter for the nervous system.
Okay, so that's a really nice, lovely way to frame why what you eat isn't just fuel, as you said earlier. It goes way beyond that. It's one of those things, though. If you say, the old trite saying, "You are what you eat," and everyone would agree with that on the street, but then you really take it forward even further of everything you just perfectly put very articulately. It really brings it home of like, your foundation of how you experience life is directly downstream of what you eat and how you do that. So just going back to endometriosis, specifically for, let's say someone is listening to this with endometriosis and they want to give this more of a holistic approach, more of like an agency, an approach in their own hands, a go. Where should they start?
I personally would start with looking at my gut. I would look at what is driving leaky gut or hyperpermeability of the gut. And there are some common enemies for the gut, let's say, alcohol being one of them. Our gut really doesn't like alcohol, and particularly if you're already struggling with certain areas of your health. And it's worth just saying, for the next 60 days, I'm going to quit just to see what difference it can make to my sleep, my mood, but particularly my hormones. Don't forget, alcohol kills bacteria. And it doesn't discriminate when it comes to the gut microbiome. It kills bacteria, good or bad. So when we kill the good, the bad gets a good foot in before the good can replenish. So looking at, for the next 60 days, I'm going to significantly reduce or eliminate alcohol and see the difference that makes. I would also look at removing gluten from your diet, because gluten causes more of the permeability. It allows the leaky gut to worsen, if you like. And when you remove gluten, it can allow the gut to start to heal. So I would remove gluten, wheat, absolutely. But I would probably look at also reducing grains as a whole, particularly again for that 60 days, so you can see the difference it's making for yourself. Wheat is heavily sprayed. It's a really heavily sprayed crop, and anything that's sprayed is going to have a negative impact on your gut microbiome. So I would look at going for the low carb options for breads and pastas and crackers. There are so many options now that maybe even 10 years ago didn't exist, but you can have seed breads, you can have seed crackers, all of these really wonderful alternatives that don't spike the blood sugar, but also don't have the gluten and the grain in them. So by keeping your blood sugars nice and balanced, you're not causing that spike, which can drive inflammation if it's happening too frequently, and can drive something called insulin resistance, which is basically upsetting our fuel system within the body. I would also look at improving the integrity of the gut lining. Can be improved by certain supplements. There's actually a really great supplement called Rescue, REZCUE. by Theranordic, and it's specifically designed to heal the gut microbiome. So sorry.
Sorry. All
It's
good.
specifically designed to heal the integrity of the gut lining. It's wonderful for people who have reflux, who believe they have leaky gut or issues with their gut. So that rescue is a really nice supplement to kind of introduce at that early stage while you're healing your gut microbiome. What you don't want to do is introduce loads of probiotics when you've got this leaky gut, which could potentially just cause something called SIBO, which is an overgrowth of the bacteria. So healing the gut first and foremost, removing certain things and allowing that healing environment. By not having alcohol, you're also really beneficially impacting the liver. Introducing lots of cruciferous vegetables, cauliflower, broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts. These are all going to help your liver and its detoxification pathways. I'm a really big fan of milk thistle for supporting the liver. It's really great for bile stimulation, which helps with the removal of toxins. It's great for reducing inflammation of the liver, and it can be really helpful for people with estrogen dominance, so perimenopause, endometriosis, fibroids. It's a great help for women who are just looking for things to help with that estrogen detoxification. I would also then look at when I'm eating and what I'm eating. So I'd create a window of eating, like an 8 a.m. cut off at 6 p.m. to really try and optimize my metabolic health and my blood sugars, my insulin sensitivity. Not eating too late at night is really going to help you get deep restorative sleep. The last thing our body wants before it goes to bed is a big feed, which sends your blood sugars up. It sends your body temperature up just at a time when your body's trying to ease and slow down. And I would absolutely look at getting morning daylight, lunchtime if you can, evening daylight, lots of outdoor time, natural light for setting your circadian rhythm. Supplement-wise, I've already mentioned milk thistle. Magnesium is incredibly helpful for women's hormonal health. To be honest, it's great for everyone, men, women, younger children, or children who are having anxiety issues or poor sleep. But a good magnesium biglycinate, so 2 glycine molecules in a magnesium. Ignore the oxides, they're not very bioavailable. But a good magnesium biglycinate will help to bring down inflammatory levels. It relaxes the uterus, it relaxes your muscles. So if you're getting PMS or migraines, it supports thyroid function, it supports the liver. It has a whole range of areas that it really helps, but it's very, very good for deep restorative sleep. And then the other supplement I would absolutely introduce is an omega-3 fatty acid, which again is going to help to support mood, inflammatory levels. Really, really helpful for sleep as well. The one I like is an ahi flower based omega called regenerative omegas. The reason I particularly like that one is it because it has a fatty acid called GLA. So it acts like a fish oil, but it also has this additional benefit of being like an evening primrose oil. However, most evening primrose oils, whilst they are rich in GLA, excuse me, are also rich in linoleic acid, which is very pro-inflammatory. About 70 to 75% of evening primrose oil is linoleic acid. So yes, it has the GLA, but it also has that really pro-inflammatory effect. The other thing is it's very often from China. It's solvent extractions. There's a lot of mixing that goes on. There's no traceability. And so it's not always the best quality. Versus ahi flower oil. So the regenerative omegas have this ahi flower oil, which has the ability to work as a fatty acid, like an oily fish oil replacement. But it also has the GLA without the issues of the pro-inflammatory linoleic acid.
That's well, there's some super concrete takeaways for it's funny that was specific for endometriosis, but actually, if anyone was to go ahead with all of that, their health is not going to be worse for it at all. So many interesting tangents to double click on. I never thought about the alcohol and the alcohol being the sort of destabilizing the gut microbiome like that. It sounds so simple when you say it, but in hindsight, I guess the misconception I've learned from you around fish oil is, a lot of people say, but you can't get the EPA and DHA from a plant source. But I mean, could you sort of dive a little bit deeper into that?
Yeah, of course. And, if you'd asked me 4 years ago, I would have said the same. I would have said actually fish oil is the superior form of getting our EPA and DHA, our intelligent fats, our really important brain fats. However, oh gosh, 2.5, maybe 3 years ago now, I came across an oil called ahi flower oil, which is it comes from a crop that's regeneratively farmed here in the UK. And the more I looked into this oil, the more I allowed my brain to shut off from that misconception of I can only get it from a fish and open up to the idea of, well, is that actually true? Sometimes you have to check yourself and ask, well, where did that come from? And is it concrete? Can I only get it from a fish oil? So the reason we don't get EPA and DHA from hemp or linseed or chia seeds, which are very rich in omega-3, but they're rich in something called ALA, which is a type of fatty acid that we get in plants that does not convert well into EPA and DHA. However, that conversion is not a one step, there's middle steps. And first, the ALA has to convert to SDA. And from SDA, the conversion goes up to EPA and DHA. Now, it turns out the rate limiting step of getting ALA up to EPA and DHA is a conversion of ALA to SDA, that middle fat. So this crop that we found growing naturally in hedgerows here in the UK, it's native to the UK. This particular crop is very rich in SDA. And so this allows us to negate that rate limiting step and see the conversion up into EPA and DHA. So it behaves like a fish oil. However, fish oils to me, I really wanted an alternative to a fish oil those 2-3 years ago when I kind of started questioning, can we only get it from a fish oil? Because our seas are so polluted. There are microplastics in all of the wildlife found within the oceans. There are heavy metals. And also, just from a conservation perspective, upsetting the ecosystem, the removing the fish that the larger fish rely on has a really negative consequence all along the food chain. So if we can find a crop that's regeneratively farmed, and this particular crop, the ahi flower crop, 1 acre of ahi flower produces as much omega-rich oil as 500,000 anchovies. So we have the solution growing here in the fields in the UK. And the more I learned about this particular oil, recognizing that the GLA was present, and GLA is incredibly important for restoring the barrier within the skin. So people who suffer from eczema or psoriasis, people who have dry, itchy skin, or just want nourished, healthy skin, also benefit from taking this omega-rich oil. So yeah, those misconceptions, those ideas that we have to sort of check ourselves on and recognize that, yes, okay, this is an early stage of understanding. There's 2 decades of research there, which by comparison to omegas that come from fish oil is it's in its infancy. However, when we start to look for alternatives, and if we find a sustainable solution to something that's benefiting us, but also benefiting the planet, to me, it's just a no-brainer.
I think this is super interesting on loads of different factors, from environmental factor, but also, the fish oils are not created equal at all, as I'm sure you know, right? The quality differences are so wide and stark. If one was to get an omega-3 index done to measure the blood concentrations of, your EPA and DHA,
Yes.
before and then after taking this plant-based essentially supplement, would it correlate with higher omega-3 index?
Well, what's really interesting is we assume that having higher levels of omegas within our system is the optimum. And this is, again, something I had to check myself on a few years ago. Because when we take, for example, DHA, which is the most unstable of the omega-3 fatty acids, it's very, very prone to becoming oxidized and rancid. It doesn't necessarily mean that we want lots of DHA in our blood. Now, we can't measure DHA very easily because it tends to be found more in the nervous system, the brain, and the tissues that are less accessible than, say, the blood. But when we look at supplementing an oil that already has DHA in it, such as a fish oil, that DHA, if it's in our blood for too long and it's just floating around our bloodstream, exposed to high blood sugars, exposed to this oxidizing environment, we can end up with, even if it's the cleanest fish oil we can find and we consume it, that DHA then becomes prone to oxidization within our blood. It's more challenging. It has been found so the ahi flower, the research shows us in rodents that it increases DHA in the nervous system. As I said, it's really challenging in humans because we can't really start looking at our brain in terms of finding our levels of DHA. Now, the EPA, again, is a really interesting question because on the omega index, is it going to influence our EPA index? Not necessarily, but we still don't know whether that correlates to the ideal. We know that it increases in EPA levels. The conversion is there because immediate blood levels show that the EPA levels increase. But sometimes we make assumptions about the body that we need to, when we're taking something and it's making EPA and DHA, that it doesn't know what to do with it and where it's influencing in terms of the body. One of the things I found really interesting when I was doing this research, and it took me a really long time to really get my head around, okay, this is definitely the way forward, is the metabolites that are produced in that conversion of SDA into EPA and DHA. So rather than taking an end product like EPA and DHA and taking it and going, okay, off you go, do your thing, taking the SDA and allowing it to go and get converted in the way it should be, in the dosage it's actually needed in the body. There's also these side products, these metabolites, and interleukin 10 is one of them. Now, interleukin 10 is an anti-inflammatory cytokine that really has positive benefits for post-exercise soreness and just muscle soreness in general. So if anyone is looking to improve their athletic performance, for example, and they want to reduce the DOMS, then taking this form of omega allows their body, because again, the muscle cells are heavily reliant on proper omega-3 fatty acids to keep them nice and fluid, to allow the amino acids to enter, which is why muscle growth is directly linked to omega-3 intake. So you've got the omega-3s to help with your muscle growth, but you've also got this interleukin 10, which helps with the soreness, which then allows you to train more effectively. So the indexes are a challenging one because we still aren't 100% sure how important they are in terms of relating them to our actual omega needs as individuals. And I think that's part of how omega-3 nutrition's become. It's become more medicalized. We need to, if someone has a problem, we need to give them more. We need to give them a dose of this and a dose of that, rather than saying, well, here is my omega-3 precursor, the SDA. Let the body make what it needs for that particular individual, rather than flooding it with DHA and hoping it doesn't become oxidized and rancid.
Yeah, that's such a lovely frame of it, isn't it? It's almost like there is a thing as big omega, right? You know, this is this big pharma pushing pharmaceuticals and plasters instead of actually treating the symptoms. Okay, fascinating topic, and yeah, we'll put some links in the show notes if you really want to explore a bit more. You mentioned inflammation a lot, and firstly, what are your sort of thoughts on inflammation? I loved your line about the soup of low levels of inflammation in the brain. I think that sort of brings it home. Firstly, what are your thoughts on inflammation in general? And then what levers can we pull to optimize that in the body?
I think we live in a very inflamed world. I think we are constantly trying to bring our inflammatory levels or our immune system back into check. So inflammation in itself is not a bad thing. It's life-saving. We need inflammation, but we need it in the right amounts and we need it to do its job appropriately. So when we are overstimulating the immune system, or we have eating a diet that's driving too much pro-inflammatory and not enough anti-inflammatory, then it causes problems. As I mentioned earlier, and you've pointed out, it causes problems with the brain, but also then it increases our risk of cancer. It increases our risk of tissue degeneration. So when our cells are sat in that soup of inflammation, they are sat in an environment that is essentially breaking them down. We know that inflammation, long-term systemic inflammation, increases our risk of cancer. So it's so important that we recognize how diet and lifestyle influence our inflammatory levels. High blood sugars are inflammatory, they're pro-inflammatory. There's something called ages, and these ages, which are when basically we have high blood sugars, and these blood sugars start grabbing hold of protein and fats within our tissue and cause these sort of granular structures. And these advanced glycated end products, they are in themselves inflammatory. So when we're constantly pushing up our blood sugars, our tissues start to form these ages, which is quite an ironic acronym, age, because they are very aging to us. So they themselves start producing inflammation around that localized area, which is almost like it becomes contagious, and it starts to weave its way through the different tissues. So if you want to protect your longevity, your brain health, Alzheimer's is known as type 3 diabetes. In the wellness world, certainly, I believe in the medical world, it's considered type 3 diabetes now as well, because of the incredible impact of high blood sugars on our poor brain. So if we want to protect ourselves from chronic illness, if we want to protect ourselves from our immediate health, mood and sleep, and general joint health and feeling great, then bringing your inflammation back into normal levels, looking at where that starts from the moment you choose food that goes on your plate to what's going on in your oral microbiome. What am I cleaning my teeth with? Am I smoking? What am I doing to upset my oral microbiome? Then going down, the microbiome starts in the mouth, and going down into the GI tract. What am I doing to support my gut microbiome? The colorful, bright berries, the beautiful, vibrant vegetables I'm eating, the seeds and nuts I might be eating, meat, or what am I doing to destroy my gut microbiome? What medication might be impacting it? What habits like drinking or stress or ultra processed foods? And then looking at lifestyle habits as well, like late nights and not sleeping well, not getting enough outdoor time, even just going into your garden, gardening, your pet. These are things that influence your microbiome. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. You don't have to invest in expensive probiotics. Some lovely sauerkraut in your fridge, getting out into nature, being around dirt in your garden and your pets. These are all really health promoting habits that are going to influence your gut microbiome, which will have a heavy influence over your immune function and your inflammatory levels.
Brilliant. You've got a wonderful way of tying a clear why to some of these practices, and linking them all together. It's really impressive to see and chat through. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about estrogen and thyroid health a little bit.
Yes.
How does estrogen and thyroid health how do they interplay, specifically for women's hormones and overall health?
Yeah, it's a real big problem, actually. The thyroid is often under recognized as being problematic. And the reason being, Ben, is because in the NHS, we tend to look at thyroid stimulating hormone as the benchmark of thyroid health. And if you present to your doctor with thinning hair, thinning out a third of the eyebrows, cold extremities, constipation, shifts in your metabolism, the biggest indicator is mood. Like your mood is intrinsically linked to your thyroid health, to the point where there's something called T3, low T3 syndrome, which is basically like depression. So when our thyroid becomes really sluggish, for want of a better word, and the thyroid is impacted by a number of things. You've pointed one of them out, estrogen. So when estrogen becomes really high, it impacts the thyroid. When estrogen becomes very low, it impacts the thyroid. Inflammation is a huge influence over our thyroid function. And when estrogen is high, it's pro-inflammatory. When estrogen is low, it's pro-inflammatory. Estrogen and progesterone are actually anti-inflammatory hormones, but in their correct levels. If estrogen is too high, it's pro-inflammatory, too low, it's pro-inflammatory. So we get this really important influence over the thyroid from what we're eating for inflammation levels. Our sex hormones have a really big impact. Our nutrition. Now, you cannot underestimate the importance of getting the right nutrients for your thyroid to function. It needs iodine. And iodine is very deficient in our soil because you don't need iodine to grow crops. So it's very rarely enriched through like farming, traditional farming. Coastal areas tend to have more iodine in their soil. But the easiest way to make sure you're getting iodine in your diet is seaweed. Just getting some organic seaweed flakes, a seaweed shaker. Give your food a delicious seasoning with some nice organic seaweed flakes. That will give you the iodine that your body needs. Selenium, incredibly important for your thyroid function, which you're going to get in a couple of Brazil nuts every day. Magnesium. People don't realize how important magnesium is for your thyroid function. And another big one is iron. Now, a lot of women are low in iron because they have heavy bleeding during their menstrual cycle, particularly when they get to perimenopause. And this is when their thyroid function can start to change. So they're bleeding heavy because they're losing progesterone first. So estrogen starts to creep up in that very early perimenopausal period. And then as you get low in iron, this can impact your thyroid function even further. So making sure you're getting those very important nutrients for optimal thyroid function. So as I mentioned earlier, thyroid stimulating hormone tends to be the go-to for testing. Oh, your thyroid's fine. I've checked your thyroid stimulating hormone. You're good. The thyroid stimulating hormone is the communication from the brain to the thyroid. The active form of the hormone is T4 and T3. Now, these are the hormones that go around the body and have that biological function on the body. The thyroid affects every system in the body, which is why when it's sluggish or working suboptimally, we have this really broad range of symptoms that can be quite hard to pinpoint. Now, with T3, this is the really biologically active part of the thyroid. T4 converts into T3, and low T3 is really linked to low mood. I mean, if someone presents with a really low mood, the first thing you want to be looking at is what's your thyroid doing? And it doesn't even mean you have to test T3, T4. That's helpful. But if you know they're under significant stress, that impacts the thyroid. Their diet's really poor, that's impacting the thyroid. Their inflammatory levels are up, that's impacting the thyroid. They might be perimenopausal, that's impacting the thyroid. There's all of these big indicators that let's assume your thyroid needs some support here. Now, when the body is under stress, or you're having a very, very calorie restricted diet, then the body thinks it's in survival mode. It says, hold on, I'm really stressed, or I'm starving, so I'm not having enough food. What it does is it creates something called reverse T3. So T3 is the active hormone, reverse T3 is the opposite. So reverse T3 slows everything down. It makes us store body fat. It kind of takes the body and zips all those dials down, so you start to feel, your mood starts to get low, your metabolism slows down, your periphery starts to get cold because you're not getting blood vessels, you're not getting blood supply to your hands and feet. Your body's prioritizing the trunk. Your hair can start to thin out because the body's like, look, I'm in survival mode here. I don't need thick hair. I need to be alive. So that reverse T3 is essentially the opposite of what T3 is doing. And this is why stress and poor sleep and poor dietary habits and an inflamed lifestyle have such a negative impact on your thyroid. So when we look at all the things we've spoken about today, good sleep, outdoor time, bringing inflammatory levels down, a nutrient-dense diet, they all have a really important effect on the brain, on the thyroid, on the gut. What's good for the brain is good for the thyroid. What's good for the thyroid is good for the gut. They all have this really important benefit on the whole body. But when we start to see the negative impact on these different systems, that inflamed level having an impact on your dopamine production, your serotonin production, that inflamed impact having an impact on your metabolism, on your mood, on your hair thinning, on your weight status, you can start to see that there are these low-hanging fruit that we can start to access that are going to impact multiple areas of the body.
Wow. Okay. Super, super clear. And then obviously very important, but again, very uplifting because there's so much you have in your control. as opposed to just something that's predetermined and that's you forever, right? When it comes to, you mentioned iron, low iron levels in, I know the other half of this podcast, Eloise, she, chronic is low iron all the time. Would supplementation be the way to do that? Would more red meat, liver? How would you approach that?
It's interesting because some women just don't absorb iron well. So I always say, let's look at why you're not absorbing iron. I mean, I'm a classic example. I'm terrible at absorbing iron, and I eat a lot of red meat. I always have, and yet my iron suffers, my iron levels. So firstly, I would say to someone, why are you anemic? What's the cause? Is it because you're low in vitamin C? So sometimes women are anemic because they're not having enough vitamin C in their diet. And you assume in this day and age that we're getting tons of vitamin C, but our citrus fruit are picked before they're ripe, they're stored, they're shipped, they sit on a supermarket shelf, and by the time we consume them, vitamin C levels are so low that it's just not enough. Our stress, so our adrenals produce our stress hormones, and when we go through the adrenal cascade, the stress cascade, we're depleting vitamin C levels all the time, and it's not a stored vitamin within our body, so we have this constant need for vitamin C. And so if you're going through a really stressful time, or your inflammatory levels are really high, this is depleting you of vitamin C, it's depleting you of magnesium, and so your vitamin C levels might be low because of a stressed event you're going through in your life, or your body's inflamed and you need more vitamin C, which then allows you to absorb more iron. It could be that your stomach acidity is really not acid enough. So our stomach acidity needs to be between pH 1 and pH 3 in order to bring in B12 and iron and zinc. Now, if your pH starts to creep up to pH 4, pH 5, so it's going more towards the alkaline side, then you can start to get reflux for a start. But secondly, you don't pull the iron that's bound really tightly to, particularly if you're relying on plant-based iron, that's really tough to break down the cellulose cell wall and bring it out of the spinach and the kale. Animal iron is easier to access, but you still need a really acidic stomach. So if someone has tried a number of strategies, i.e. they've tried acidifying their stomach, they've tried minimizing stress, optimizing vitamin C, and still struggling with really low iron, like I was, then supplementation is next. However, there's a caveat. You just don't want to supplement with any old iron. And there's a reason for this. If you're giving your body iron and you're supplementing it in, firstly, a form that's not very beneficial for the gut, you can experience constipation and very dark stools. I think most of us have been there with iron supplementation and we're like, yeah, that's not fun at all. But secondly, even if you're finding one that's really easy on the gut, like an iron biglycinate, then the microbes within your gut start to have a tug of war with the iron. And they can be like, listen, I'm winning out on this. So you absorb less, the microbes can get more, and you can start to get a dysbiosis in the gut. So the bacteria you don't want getting the iron can start to get it, and you don't get the iron, you're supplementing iron, and your microbes go crazy on it. Now, there is one form of iron that I really like that is incredibly beneficial, and that's nano iron. So nano iron bypasses digestion completely. It's these teeny, tiny, tiny particles of iron that you hold in your mouth, and it's absorbed through your mucosa. So you hold it, you have a completely empty stomach, you hold it within your mouth, it absorbs via the mucosa, then you can swallow it. It just gets absorbed through the mucosa of the gut. It's not digested because it just passes through the barrier into the body directly. And for those who have any kind of digestive scar tissue, anyone with Crohn's, anyone who struggles with gut issues, but also people who know they need to supplement iron and they're struggling to get the results with their traditional spartane and all these other forms of iron supplementation that are less effective, then this particular form of nano iron can be incredibly helpful for bringing up your stored iron and your available iron.
Okay, brilliant. That's that's super clear and actionable for the listener who might be struggling with iron levels for sure. You've written a book called Primal Living. What does primal living mean to you?
Primal living to me means living congruently with our physiology. it means we don't have to remove ourselves from modern life, because let's be honest, we're in this life. We want all the trappings of modern support, like internet and a fridge freezer, a way of keeping our lives convenient, phones and technology. However, it also means not turning our back on our physiology, recognizing that unless we are aware of the impact of blue light, or the impact of not getting enough sunshine, the impact of not having enough time with nature, the impact of not recognizing our fight or flight state versus our rest and digest, or we see our bodies as being faulty because they're not working well in our really modern go, go, go lives. It's about understanding that you need to take care of these foundational parts of your health to thrive, but also thrive in a modern way of living. So I feel like we try and shortcut a lot with our bodies instead of seeing them as these amazing, curious, creative beings that we are, that we can have so much influence over creating our own health currently, but also our own health destiny. Where do I want to be in 10, 20? I'm 46. I'm closer to 50 now than I am 40. And I think of myself in terms of where do I want to be when I'm 80 and 90? And I'm planning for that now because I want to be cognitively still really sharp. Physically, I still want to be really strong. So I'm constantly thinking about muscle mass and bone health and heart health, and what I'm doing today in order to influence that in 10, 20, 30 years' time.
Lovely. Yeah, echo that for sure. I think that's a sort of long-term horizon to your health, right? Does bring it home. When it comes to, I guess, like modern health trends at the moment, do you see any that you are concerned with, that you think are pulling us away from this way of living?
I think there are pros and cons to some of the modern health trends. Like there's a lot of wearables around, and they have been around for a while, but I think sometimes they can be really distracting from allowing your nervous system to take a break from not getting too drawn into the numbers, the tracking everything. Now, for some people, they love tracking everything. I think what's really key, though, is to make sure that you're enjoying the health journey that you're on, and getting outdoors, enjoying morning light, enjoying the food that you're consuming that's right for you, getting your deep sleep. I think the wearables can give you an insight, but I also think that we can get so fixated on making sure the numbers are right that it can have a detrimental impact on the overall goal, which is to enjoy life, to get the best out of it, but also to create this really robust, resilient health platform from which to enjoy our wonderful, healthy lives.
Yeah, for sure. They can pull. I used to use them quite a lot, and I still do. My partner's very much better at the intuition side of health than I am. I'm much more like, give me the data, like what I have to do, show me. But I think when you remove the wearable data, you're forced to rely on your own intuition a bit more. Like, how do you actually sleep? Well, how do you feel? As opposed to, whatever points you got. So,
I agree. I think also there are some really nice trends coming to the forefront, more into the mainstream now, that are, and again, with any trend, like for me, mushrooms are just amazing. I love medicinal mushrooms. But as with any health trend, when it becomes really mainstream, there are the sort of greenwashing companies that come along, and they'll just stick lion's mane on the front of their product, and it might be a really poor dosage, or it's likely a poor quality. A lot of mushrooms are coming from China, and they have maltodextrin within them to make them water soluble. So I think, as with anything, it's trusting the company, it's trusting that the people behind that brand are doing their due diligence, and that they're doing what's best for their consumers, rather than just trying to make a quick buck off what's currently trending. And I feel like the wellness industry is really picking up where the medical industry's let people down, particularly women. But within the wellness industry, there's also a lot of scope for menowashing, greenwashing, and poor practices. So we still want to be making sure that we're looking to experts and individuals who are focused more on the quality and doing that due diligence for their consumers, customers, clients, rather than just these big brands who'll stick on whatever's trending at the moment because they know it'll sell.
Yeah, I've got this running doc I have on my laptop called Overhyped to Underhyped, and I move things around. And for a while, sort of functional mushrooms are great, but they're overhyped in my opinion at the moment. And you always know something's overhyped when the contract manufacturers are readily stocking whatever ingredient is in-house, and they're like, "Yeah, we've got ample supplies for years. We've got it." It's like, okay,
Yeah,
probably overhyped.
yeah, and I think with certain things, like adaptogens and nootropics, these are things that have been used for, gosh, centuries in Ayurvedic medicine and herbalism. And because people are looking for an alternative, there are great alternatives out there. Like ashwagandha can be really helpful. Um, Rhodiola can be really helpful. There are these herbs that are beneficial for our well-being. But again, it just comes down to you're not going to out supplement a poor diet and a poor lifestyle. Bringing it in alongside morning light and a good sleep routine and a great diet, that's when you really start to see the benefits of some of these nootropics, herbs, and adaptogens. I would always say go for your core basics first. Like if you're struggling with sleep and anxiety, muscle cramps, and there's a lot going on in your life, get a magnesium and an omega first. Like those two things alone are going to make a big difference. Then maybe start looking at the slightly more curveball supplements, because you will be sold the sun, the moon, and the earth that a supplement's going to fix everything. And that company will not tell you that actually that's going to do nothing if you're getting 3 hours sleep and you're indoors all day and you're staring at a screen for 12 hours a day and then eating junk food. Like, let's get the low hanging fruit first.
Absolutely. I really did like your point earlier about tying the thread between uh, essentially omega-3 supplements can oxidize in your bloodstream when exposed to sort of very inflammatory and I guess they come into an inflammatory environment. So whatever
Yeah,
internal environment you have going on in your body will affect the outcome of said supplement you're putting in as well, right?
absolutely. And that's why we have to look at the nuances with these things. It's all very well just popping a fish oil and going, great, now I've done my bit for my brain. I'm going to crack on with my strip lighting office for the next 14 hours and maybe hit the gym for 45 minutes in the evening, versus actually I'm going to go for a walk in the morning light. I'm going to break up. I might even move my desk to by a window. There are small things that we can do that make a big difference. I'm going to start boiling up a load of eggs and keeping them in my fridge as a quick go-to snack food with some salt sprinkled on. Like, just preparing. I know we're all really busy. I mean, my freezer is my gold mine when it comes to quick and easy foods. I've got so many things in there, like frozen cauliflower rice and things that are just will make my life really easy. And my fridge is the same: sauerkraut and really nice pestos, boiled eggs, feta, like things in there, cold cuts of meat that allow me to just put food together when I'm hungry and I don't have time to think about what am I cooking today. I'm not saying we're not all busy. Listen, I'm in that camp for sure. But I am saying if we find these empowering alternatives, you find yourself just in that better state to start going, wow, that worked so well. I feel great this week. Now I have the energy and mental clarity to make a few more changes and a few more. And 6 months down the line, you're in a completely different place.
Amen to that. I couldn't say it any better, for sure. I've taken up so much of your time already, and this super fascinating conversation. Maybe we have to do a part 2 at some point, for sure, if obviously you're open to it. I'd love to end with some quick fire questions if we may. Do you have a guiding book or idea you try and live your life by?
Ooh, trust in the journey is the mantra I always say to myself. I'm a big believer in not just seeing that the good times are where you learn, but actually you learn more in the challenging times of your life. And those really are gold. They might not feel like it at the time, but you learn more from those really challenging times than you do in your success and your riding high times. So when things are tough for me, I just say, trust in the journey. I'm learning a lot at this stage.
That resonates. So I'll do that one again. What do you wish men understood more about female hormones?
That's a really, really great question. I think recognizing that these sex hormones that we have in our body are really potent, and that we have estrogen receptors all over our body, particularly in the brain, the bones, the gut. And so we essentially are influenced in our mood, our emotions, our energy, our libido. All of these things are influenced. And that influence is really our biology pulling its strings. The times when our body's trying to make us more introverted and a bit more withdrawn to try and encourage the implantation of an egg, to the times when we're more extrovert and feeling more sexual and driven in that way, because our body's encouraging us to go out and reproduce. So we are very much governed a lot of the time by what's going on with our biology. And having an understanding partner, brother, father, male in our lives who kind of recognizes that we change sometimes our emotions throughout the month, and giving some space for that to happen without taking it personally or being reactive to it is really, really powerful.
Great answer. Love that. It's easy to sort of forget how complex each sex's hormones are and what goes on in the human body, right? When it comes to last question, is always the same on this podcast, which is, what uncomfortable truth do you believe that very few people? Sorry, let's start again. What important truth do you believe that very few people agree with you on?
With people do what?
Sorry, what important truth do? Sorry, we'll cut that bit. I've just completely butchered the question. What important truth do you believe that very few people agree with you?
I would say that the most important thing that maybe not all mainstream agree with yet, particularly in medicine, but I think that the people who are adopting it would agree, is that we have a huge amount of influence over our own health in terms of longevity, in terms of we're not governed by our genes, we're not governed by our past medical history, that we have a huge amount of control just through our minds, our nervous system, and the daily habits we undertake. We just don't understand enough about our bodies to even know how miraculous they are. And I'm a scientist saying that, but our bodies are just these phenomenal vesicles of our spirit, and we can do a huge amount through having this positive outset, this positive mind. And don't underestimate what your body can do from a healing perspective or otherwise. They never fail to amaze you, and be in awe of your own body. We're trained, particularly as women, we're trained to have this self dislike and this self poor image of our body. Get curious about your body, start loving it and respecting it, because it's just this incredible phenomenal miracle that we inhabit. And I think the more women start to realize how amazing they are, the more they'll start to stop self-dislike or self-loathing and start to go, wow, this body's amazing, I want to look after it.
It's been so great to talk to you, Pauline. That was a really fun episode. Really enjoyed it, and so many takeaways for the audience, right? Often you get a great episode, but there's not a lot of practical takeaways, but that's all well and good. Those episodes are fine as well. But I feel this, there's a load of real insights for people to take away. So thanks so much for coming on. Where can we keep up with you and follow along with your work? And we'll put the link to your wonderful book, Primal Living, in the show notes. But yeah, where can we keep up?
You can keep up with me on Instagram. Pauline J. Cox I do a lot of work on there. I'm a little present on LinkedIn, but not quite so much. Sow and Arrow, so that's SOW, and arrow.com is my website, where I also do blogs and newsletters and things. And my second book, Hungry Woman, is predominantly for female focused health. So Primal's a great example for everyone, men, women, anyone who just wants to improve their general well-being from a gut health, a blood sugar, liver perspective. Hungry Woman is more hormone focused, eating for good health, happiness, and hormones. And that one's available Amazon or Waterstone Smiths. It's available all over the country.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Super fun. Appreciate you. Appreciate your time. And yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Ben.